Coen, would you like to
Yes.
instructions?
Happy New Year, everyone. This is Sephardic World, brought to you by the Sephardic Genealogical Society. As always, we thank our patrons who make all of this possible. And a hearty welcome to our viewers on YouTube. This week, we have with us again David Silvera. And last time he talked about the annual accounts of Bevis marks and how to transcribe them with transcribers. And this week, he will talk about some results of our research of the first annual accounts of Bevis marks. And there were some results that surprised even me. So welcome to David Silvera, who has a lot of experience in space technology, but now he's researching Sephardic genealogy and history. And welcome, David.
Thank you, Ton, and for introduction, and thank you also for being a source of our inspiration. Just so that everybody knows, I call Ton our professor. And also thanks to Team Ali and David Mendoza and Bob Lazelle, who very much help with what we're doing as we go along. In this presentation, we look at some of the information that's contained in these accounts. And my purpose here is really to encourage you and other historians and genealogists to dig in when the accounts are published online. And the good news is they should be online within a few weeks or months. And if you recall, the accounts that we're talking about were largely overlooked by the literature. We didn't find any literature that covered the period. And it's about 10 years after the expansion of the original Cree Church Lane Synagogue, and 20 years before Bevis Marks was built. So we trained the software to recognize 62,700 words of the script that you see on the left of the screen, and produces a transcription that you see on the right half of the screen. And we have 170 pages of this ready for online publication on Read and Search. As I indicated, there's good news. We have funding in place to do it, and it will allow everybody to sit at home with their home computer and do what I've done in research, this particular archive. Presentation topics. Let's start with a brief word on the N.L. Burge conundrum that we introduced in our first discussion. And the purpose of that was to try and bring you back to find the answer in the second. So we'll give you the answer. We'll look at the leadership in the community, the members, the Yehidim, and we'll look at the accounts structure and content. And then we'll derive information from the accounts in the calendar and events of the period. We'll find births, and we'll find people arriving and departing, and we find some information on forasteros. So we're looking at very preliminary findings. There's much more than you're going to see here for somebody working within it. And there's also relationships to be derived between the information that we see in the accounts that I have not even had time to do. So we're skimming the trees here. The N.L. Burge conundrum, this was around events in 5437, and I've got it on the right-hand side of the screen are the copies of the handwritten records, and it talked about in Hesvan 1, Senor Henriquez, at the Burge of Senor Henriquez, and Kislev 5, the Burge Senor Coen. And Hesvan 1 and Kislev 5 didn't have a religious significance, so we couldn't figure what this was, but we did know that it certainly was a fundraising event because we saw they were collecting, at least in one of the cases that are showing on the screen, funds for Terra Santa and for redeeming captives. So what was the significance of the Burge? Now, if you analyze the records, there were 25 mentions of the Burge, and what you're seeing here is a piece of a spreadsheet with the scan number, the year of the record, the member who made whose entry it was, the date, and the description of what was entered. And so you're seeing here, I've highlighted two. The first one is Isaac Henriquez. Isaac Henriquez promised for an alberge of his son, Sadaka of 2 pounds, of Terra Santa 10 pounds. So the events were held in the Burge, in that case in Burge des Henriquez, and then the other one is the Burge of his son for Joseph Coen. Hesfan 1 was hosted by Henriquez, son of Isaac Henriquez. Which of the 7 Henriquezes that is, I'm not really sure, but there are at least 7 in the community. And Kislev 5, hosted by Coen. We think this was the son of Joseph Coen de Azevedo, and that would be Jacob Coen de Azevedo. So what's the answer to the Burge? Well, scholars and archivists believe that El Burge is an attempt to calque the French auberge as auberge. So it's an inn or hostel, possibly referring to an English pub or tavern, using the Iberonized form of the French auberge. Pete's diary describes the Mitre Tavern on Fenchurch Street opposite the Creechurch Lane Synagogue. It might have looked something like the tavern we see on the right, an illustration about 100 years later. And so the question we left with is, could the Mitre Tavern have been El Burge? Could Mitre Tavern have been the auberge that was used by Mr. Coen and Mr. Henriquez, Senor Coen, Senor Henriquez, in which to host the fundraising events? That's as close as we got to being convinced. So next section, we're going to talk about leadership, the members of the synagogue, and the account's structure. And bear in mind that the context of this is after the expansion of the Creechurch Lane Synagogue. And at the time, the middle of this is the release, the second version of the Askamot, which are the regulations for the congregation. The expansion actually took the seating up to about 250, estimated by one of our literature persons who'd done research on it, estimated for 170 males and 80 women, seating for 80 women. And naturally, this was at the time done with the women sitting in a gallery overlooking the main section of the synagogue below. So how is the synagogue organized? And this is reflected in literature. So what I'm going to show you here is based on literature, but we're going to pull in fit pieces into the puzzle here. The organization appeared to be interested in is 5436 through 5438. But I've included a year before and a year after, as it provides a little continuity. The organization was focused on in the Mahamad. The Mahamad ran the show. There were 2 Parnasim and a Gabbai. The Gabbai was essentially the accountant and the keeper of the accounts that we're going to see. And the Parnasim and the Gabbai were totally responsible for everything that happened in the synagogue. They wrote the Askamot and had them approved by the congregation, and away they went. Other persons subservient to the Parnasim, to the Mahamad, was the Haham, Joshua de Silva, in this particular case. Parnas of the Talmud Torah, this was the person appointed to manage the school, and the purpose of this was really discipline in the school and order in the school. The Rabbi of the Talmud Torah was the teacher, and the Parnas of Hebra and administration of the cemetery. And this was Hebra was a society to take care of the sick and for burial, and administer the cemetery. There are gaps in this chart. I'm sure they were filled. I just haven't got the names. I didn't have the names in the research we were doing, and I didn't find them in the literature that I surveyed while doing this. The membership. Now, I'm going to throw on the screen a list of all the surnames of the membership as listed in the accounts. Some have 2 surnames, and where that happens, they've got 2 surnames. And we have actually alphabetized them by the second surname. Maybe helps you a little bit. We're going to leave this on the screen for a while while I chat. I've got three names highlighted: Barzilay, Siqueira, and Lusada. I'm going to talk more about those later on. Those gentlemen later on. There are 1 or 2 Ashkenazic names in here and an English name as well. Now you'll quickly find out that the accounts, the same names were spelled differently. And whether that was the way the member wanted it spelled or the way the scribe spelled it at the time, we don't really know. But you will find multiple spellings of the same names as we go through the accounts. This is a lot of detail, and you really won't have time to read this all or remember it, but the good news is that there isn't a test at the end of all of this, and you'll be able to get a copy of the charts at some point by going on and looking for them online. Answer the question that many people would have is, which was the wealthiest family in the congregation? And according to literature, Abraham Israel de Siqueira was the wealthiest merchant. So let's look at Mr. de Siqueira, and seeing here is his signatures at the end of his will in November 1678. He was the Parnas in 5438, and that, in fact, was the year he passed on. The signatures to his will: his son Isaac, also known as Alfonso Rodriguez, Haham Joshua de Silva, Dr. Abram Perez Galvo, and Moses Bueno. You'll notice that Abram Israel de Siqueira was also known as Gomez Rodriguez, and his son Isaac was known as Alfonso Rodriguez. Now, thanks to Ton for finding this his signature panel here from the will. So, a word about the accounts. These are voluntary donations by the membership. They're not the imposter, and they're not the finta. Finta would be a membership subscription. Imposter was a tax on revenue that the member earned through business. And so these are entirely voluntary donations. They were given on religious events and for charitable purposes. They used to recognize family arrivals and departures. They recognized births and circumcisions. And the dates that we're seeing are the dates when the money was recorded by the gabbai or scribe. So we can't say that if we see a birth or a circumcision that this was a date when it actually happened. Presumably it's close, but can't derive an absolute relationship on that. The transcriptions you're going to see closely follows what the scribe recorded. And we have not included expenditures, spending on poor relief and dispatchos and forasteros. So there is no detail on how money was dispensed. I have looked at subsequent years, and that kind of detail is available starting in the next accounting book, but not in this one. So what can we learn from the accounts of the three prominent Yehidim? How did they spend their money? What were they thinking about? And here's the first one. It's like da Siqueira, 5436 accounts. And I'll give you 5 minutes to read this, and then we can talk about it. I'm just kidding. So the good news was that we did the transcription, and here it is in a readable form. And this is what the book is about, that we've got tables that look like accounting tables, and they're readable. I've got some arrows here to step us through some examples of line items. Item 1, an offering on the 2 days of Passover. And my translation here is where I read it, and someone knowing Portuguese can certainly improve on what I've said, but this is a sense of what I get out of reading this. Item 2 is an offering on a rogativa for Sarah Moraes. Now, rogativa is a prayer for healing. It's a very strong prayer for healing, more like a pleading for Sarah Maurice. And today probably known would be a Mishaberak would be the equivalent in a synagogue today, at least in the Ashkenazic side. The third arrow is an offering for the good arrival of Saloma Curiel. This one's quite clear. Mr. Curiel arrived, doesn't say where he arrived from, but he arrived somewhere around there, little 13. Fourth arrow is an offering for safe passage for Joseph Coen, and this is Coen is departing London. The Viajam is departing, and it's a good departure, safe travel. The fifth arrow, a little 27, on the window for the arrival of his brother, his hermano. No, you're using an abbreviation, IRO, it's hermano. Their accounts are full of abbreviations, and hermano was a very common one. So his brother of Isaac da Siqueira arrived somewhere around a little 27. Item 6, Tibet 10, for the health of his father, followed by XL. Now XL is our transcription of what was there that we can't read. So maybe when someone looks at this page and sees what was actually written there, we'll know what it was. We can't recognize it. So we've got a placeholder for it for what it was. But notice pi it's a spelling for father, very interesting. It's spelled several different ways in Portuguese. And seventh, Promesio for Mary Rofi. We understand that Mary Rofi was an emissary from the Terra Santa, from the Holy Land, and he came to London to collect money to take back, and this is one. He got contribution from Isaac da Siqueira and several others. Next person we look at is Senor Isaac Barzilay. He was a Parnas 5435. And his accounting, his arrow number 1 is an offering Pilos Parnassus de Talmud Torah. So this is an offering for the Parnasim of the Talmud Torah. We saw the names of the Talmud Torah Parnasim on the organization chart. They were appointed on Sivan 6, and so there's an offering to recognize their appointment. Item 2, a blessing of his daughter, and 2 shillings for Terra Santa and 2 shillings for redeeming captives. So here we've got a blessing of a daughter from Isaac Barzilay, presumption that she was born pretty close to the date of 24th of, and this was actually going to be Tisri, though it's not shown. It has to be Tisri because of the way the account structured. So you see the total of 6 shillings, and he gave 2 shillings for his daughter, 2 shillings for Terra Santa, and 2 shillings for captives. Item 3, Tibet 10, for the Sode of Gonzalez Rodriguez, and a surah and the celebration of Benjamin Nunez. Now, ROIZ was a abbreviation for Rodriguez. And I happen to know it's Gonzalez Rodriguez because somewhere else it was also expressed and somebody wrote the name out. And the surah was a celebration that the synagogue allowed the celebrant to decide who got the honors on that day. And I've even heard rumors they were allowed to take out the good silver, but I can't be sure about that. But there was certainly, they were allowed to select the honorees for that day in the synagogue. Number 4, offering on the health of Gonzalez, a second offering for Gonzalez. And that concludes Mr. Barzilay. Next person we look at an account is Mose Baruch Lasada. I believe this gentleman has some Barbados connections. Tan would remember to mention that later. First item is offering for the good departure, either travel, of Jesurun. Jesurun, as we find later, was a Gabbai for the 5437. Here we see he's departing London in ER 5 of 5436. Second one is an offering on the arrival of his wife at the synagogue, and for Mokata, and Mokata was another member. So the offering on his wife's arrival at the synagogue. On the third one is offering for the good health of the daughter of Jesurun. The fourth one on the arrival of Henricus. Unfortunately, it doesn't tell us which Henricus, so I can't tell Ainsley, but it's Mr. Henricus. 5, Prometeo, Sefre e Forasteros. As the offering of a Sefre was very frequent in these records, and we think it believes it was an honor in the synagogue to be called to the Torah. That is the best interpretation I can get. Hope somebody can confirm it or clarify it. And this was for forasteros. It wasn't clear that the money went to the forasteros directly, or it was a fund for forasteros, but it was meant to be collected for forasteros. The 7th arrow on the haftarah of his son. So Mr. Lasada's son read haftarah, and he made an offering in honor of his son reading the haftarah. And finally, half shekel in the Purim bowl. It was a custom to have bowls that money would contribute, and everyone was required, members were required to contribute half a shekel, 1 shilling and 6pence in the bowl for Purim. And the Purim bowls were used to provide funds for those who were needy at that time. So we can see that if you look at the way the accounts are structured and the repeating of words, if you search for keywords, you can find information on the calendar, you can find information on events, births, arrivals, departures, and forasteros. Keyword, very interesting, because with the variations in spelling, you really have to do less than a keyword. In fact, you might want to find any 3 letters that are most likely to be common in the spelling. I mentioned circumcision because there are at least six different spellings on that. And so if you search for it, in one spelling, you may only find a few, but if you change what you actually search for, and it's a fuzzy search technique, you can find more of them. So having done that, what you're going to see is information that's been done through data mining, as we call it, and summarized on a number of pages coming forward from here. Looking at the calendar. First of all, we started with the Hebrew calendar, and the year begins in Tishrei in Rosh Hashanah. Some of the records in the second half of the book were recorded in the Julian calendar, where the year begins in January. So calendars are absolutely skewed. And so when even though this book says it's 3 years, it's really only 2 years and about 3 months of the 3rd year. The Julian dates were converted. I did convert Julian dates to Hebrew calendar because that was the only way to have a stable analysis. And the advantage is that if you're in the Hebrew calendar, you can identify festivals immediately without any issues. You know what they were. So that we had to do that translation to do much of this analysis you're going to see. Some interesting additions to the calendar. I think most of us here are familiar with the Hebrew calendar, the standard starting in Nisan and ending in Adar and Adar 2. You start with Pesach and end with Purim. And in this particular case, there are some additions here I've indicated in bold print. The first one is Sivan 6, the appointment of the Parnasim. Now, I mentioned that earlier, and we're going to see how that was recorded. And second one, 28th of Sivan, an event that was described as No Berem de Baruch. And then another one is the 24th of Tishrei. This is after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a day after Simchat Torah, as a matter of fact. It's fundraising events hosted in private homes. So if you're looking at it this way, this is written on arrow 3. It's funds for Terra Santa and Cativos in a Casa de Barzilay and Robles. So we're going to look at these three, not in this order, but and then we'll see what we can learn from those events. This is the easy one, the Ofrecer Pilos Parneses, the Talmotor. I've mentioned this already. Literature explains their appointments for Gomez, Serra, and Israel Davila. And the event was recognized by many members with offerings looking just like the one we're seeing up on screen. Funds for Terra Santa and Cativos. This two examples. I marked where 5437 starts. It's what wasn't clear was that didn't know why would they have a fundraising event outside of the synagogue? I don't really know. One would think that the capacity, maybe the synagogue did not have a hall, and that when they wanted to do fundraising, they'd have to go somewhere else and have someone host it. So it does happen today. Even on the left-hand side, you can see on the 24th of Tisri, in Casa de Robles, and followed by Sadaka. And on the other one, 24th of Tisri, in Casa de Barzilay. So what we're seeing is on the 24th of Tisri, we've got fundraising events at two different locations on the same day, or what seems like two different locations on the same day. Something didn't sound right about that, to have competing fundraising events and two people's sponsored by two members on the same date. So it was worthy of a look. And so let's look at the details. And the details from the records, you'll see very definitely Tisri 24, you'll see Casa de Barzilay, and you see some Casa de Robles. So what do we know about these folks? Well, Isaac Barzilay was a Parnas several times. And literature tells us that he had, number one, left seat in the synagogue. So clearly he was a very important person. And then Antonio Rodriguez Robles, interesting, he wasn't listed as in the books as a member. And I searched the cemetery records and he was not buried in that time. So what was Robles doing sponsoring meetings for the membership? Something didn't seem right. So when we look through the literature, we'll find out that Robles was actually saved by being a Jew. And this is very interesting, and I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version. He was born in Portugal, and he had held Spanish government appointments in the Canary Islands. It was not unusual for Portuguese Jews to, conversos, to have appointments in Spain or in the Canaries. In 1656, he was in London, and the war with Spain, between England and Spain, because of his presumed Spanish origin, a shipment of his goods was seized by the English authorities. There was a hue and cry of the merchants, and he was ultimately saved because he could prove that he was not Spanish. And as he was a Jew, he had been persecuted by Spain, and the Council of State ordered the warrants against him to be discharged. And it was just after this that Carvajal and others successfully petitioned Cromwell to allow Jews to meet for prayer and have a cemetery in London. This was a readmission of Jews into London. So I've got some good sources on that, and that was very interesting. It's quite a history there for Robles, but that doesn't tell the whole story, because Antonio Rodriguez Robles, and this is again using literature, he was also known as Rodriguez Ferrarino or Ferrimine. He was born in Fundão in 1620 and died in London in 1688. His wife, Ribka, also known as Leonora, survived him. And the records that Mr. Edgar Samuel found showed that they were living after Robles died, they were living at the son's house. And the son was Joseph Barzilay, who was married to Esther Gomez Porto, and they had another son and other girls. And so this conclusion from this is that Robles was also known as Isaac Barzilay. So that solved the question of how come you could have the event in two different names at the same night. And Robles and Barzilay were indeed the same person. So we look at about Robles, he had 3 or 4 aliases right there. Next, we look at Nobarim on 28th of Sivan. So let's look in. It's one day, 5436. What is the meaning of Baruch? In this case, Baruch is a Hebrew word. We know it means blessed. What is the meaning of Berem? Couldn't find that in any language directly. And so we started to take a look at the details. And if we look at other records, and I've got 2 marked here under the green box, on the left-hand side, the 28th of Sivan, we have Noberem de Baruch, and immediately before it have a Sefer for Mose Baruch, Jesurun. So there were several of these, and it led us to the conclusion that Baruch was really meaning Mose Baruch or Mose Baruch Lusada. So it was not the Hebrew word blessed, but it was Mose Baruch Lusada. And similarly for Jesurun, we found that in year 5, another record that showed Officer Tellez saw that Jacob Jesurun. So Jesurun is actually short for Jacob Jesurun. So conclusion, Baruch was Mose Baruch Lusada, and Jesurun was Jacob Jesurun Alvares. And it seemed to have been the practice to refer to people by their first surname, at least for those 2 individuals. So now we need to take a look at what's Berem about. And it was written as no Berem or no space Berem or no Berim. I think it's meaning the same thing because it wasn't unusual to contract words together. Fundraising 28th Sivan. And closest I can get to it from literature, Neville Lasky wrote that Asifat Habarim means gathering of friends. So is it possible that Berim or Berem is a scribe spelling of the Hebrew word for friends, which would mean that no Berim could mean the friends of Terra Santa and Kativos, hence maybe the friends of Baruch. Open to other explanations. So I'm hoping that the wisdom of our combined audience will help us find a better answer or confirm an answer to this one. Move on to some life cycle events. Now, formal recording of births in the community started in the 18th century. Miriam Rodriguez Pereira, who is the honorary archivist at Bevis Marks, derived circumcisions and some female births from donations in the accounting records as early as 5439, which is the year after the records that we're looking at here. We are finding circumcisions and female births prior to those reported in the literature. And that was quite a find for us in reviewing this information. Now, we looked at a lot of records and we searched for circumcisions. And for circumcision, you'll find it either the word circumcision or you'll find it relating to, with a search on the word menino, or filho, or hijo, neto, sobrino. That is the son, in Portuguese and Spanish son, and grandson, and nephew. So we look for those, search for the keywords. And we've got 2 records here. The first one is Nasa Cancisa, Fila de David da Silva. David da Silva was, of course, the Haham. And the second one, circumcision of Menino de Henriquez, the son of Henriquez, the son of David da Silva. And we found 102 donations associated with circumcisions. We summarize these, it's likely to have been 24 circumcisions because, of course, there are repeats in here, but I did break them out and try and analyze them. Many cases we could identify the father because of the way the offering was written, and the grandfather. Unfortunately, if you have a grandfather identification, it doesn't necessarily lead us to the father identification. So I've just left it as grandfather right now. So that's 102 records, 24 circumcisions. This is in 5437 only, first year. Let's look at the details. I'm going to put these up on the screen and leave it for a minute or two. So looking here at 20 circumcisions. Take a couple of them. Sobrinos de Jacob de Miranda would be nephews of Jacob de Miranda, son of Israel Correa, grandson of Marais, grandson of Abram Rodriguez da Costa, and so on. The positive identifications would be son of Israel Correa, son of Joseph Coen de Azevedo, son of Templo, Benjamin Nunez, son of Jacob Jesurun Alvares, son of Marais, son of Israel Correa. It's impossible to tell from these whether all of them are infants. We know that many were circumcised on arrival or after arrival. Also, looking at the way that the circumcision dates were recognized, is to suggest that there wasn't a full-time availability for of a mile. Don't know the things we don't know. If we look at the 5438, and we're looking at only 2 months here, there are 4 circumcisions only. Another Templo son, and it's about a year later, and grandson to Isaac Tellez de Costa, and son to Joseph Coen de Azevedo. And son to David Pessoa. I want to go back to the case of Noberita Jacob Jesurun. And on this one, 19 members made an offering. And Jacob Jesurun Alvares made an offering himself. When my son is circumcised, cuando circuncisao a meu menino. And this was on about ER1 in 5437, which would have been 23rd of April, 1677. This gentleman was a Gabe from 5437 to 5438. And I took a look at the literature because it was seemed to be an interesting person. And I wanted to step aside from the details and look at Mr. Alvares. He was married in 5434 in Amsterdam, and Ton found the record of his marriage in the Portuguese synagogue. His bride was Sarah de Henriquez Faro. Witness was Aron Pacheco. Interesting, Aron Pacheco was a member at the synagogue in London, so Jacob and Aron were both Yehidim in London at the time. His son was circumcised, as we saw a few minutes ago, in 1st of ER 5437. So he was Gabe in 5437 to 5438. And I'm showing on the left side here a document. The story goes that when he was Gabai, he used this Sadaka money to purchase the cemetery in his Portuguese name of Alvaro de Fonseca. The Mahamad was somewhat concerned about this, and ownership of this cemetery should not be an individual's name. So in 1678, he signed this declaration in his Portuguese and synagogue name. So he signed it as both as Alvaro de Fonseca, as Jesurun Alvares, stating that he had bought the Bethlehem with his money of his tzedakah, wherefore it belonged to the congregation, and neither he nor any dependent of his would ever have any right to the burial ground. I thought that was quite a fascinating story. He was 1673, finds him as a diamond merchant in London. He buys diamonds in Amsterdam, sell them in London. His partnered with Isaac Israel Siqueira and Abram de Porto, and in 1682 went to India and established a business in diamonds and other pearls and fine goods, and returned to London 19 years later. So he actually left his wife and son for 19 years, and we can look at his family tree here. He had one son, and we now know the son was born about April 23rd. The record showed 1677, but we now know it's close to April 23rd. Now, female births. Searching for Menina Filha, or FA, the abbreviation for Filha, Neta for granddaughter, Sabrina, and abbreviations for Sabrina. And here's an example of one of them, 5436. This is the accounts of Isaac Barzilay, blessing of his daughter on 24th of Tisri, Ne Baracha de Surfilha, on Baraka, my daughter, of his daughter. And if I look at what we have found looking through the records, we've found the records of 3 daughters, apparent blessing of 3 daughters. Barzilai, that we just talked about on 24th of Tisri, the birth of daughter to Senor Mose Mokata, and Senor Abram de Porto's daughter on ER 2. So those 3 look very, it's interesting, 2 of them are recorded as Nasim or Nasu, which is the birth, and Barzilai is recorded on the blessing. So not sure if there's that affects the actual time of the birth versus the time that the offering was made, but I can't draw any conclusions, unfortunately. Several items, offerings here on the good health of the daughter of Jesurun. There's 2 of them, and one on the rogativa for the sister of David Mendez, Enriquez. Hashkaba it's a prayer for someone who's passed. I guess it's equivalent of a yacht site. Hashkaba for Abram Gonzalez sister, and one in honor of 11 months for the aunt of Abram de Porto. And other items here for daughter Francia, arrival, we mentioned Baruchiel's wife for the synagogue, and so on. There are other references to females and centurions, but I haven't got them pulled up in. I was really focused on trying to find female births. So far, only 3. Arrivals and departures. On arrival, we look for Vindo and Veo. Vindo is, I guess, a Portuguese. Veo is the Spanish. Some of the records were written in Portuguese, some in Spanish. Departures of Vietjem, Ida, Sayo, and Forasteros. Look at 5436. There are 71 records on arrivals with 15 different names. And I'll put the names up here. Oops, I didn't mean to go that far. Let's go back. Okay. on Sivan, there's just a record, those who came from outside. And the second one, abbreviation for Dazivedo, Henriquez, aunt of Isaac Tellez da Costa, Jacob Tellez da Costa. And then De Bravos, which is going to be arrival of the Brave, general recognition of people coming in with Brave. Chavez Villegas to Henriquez, cousin of Jacob de Miranda. Slomo de Medina Curiel, Jacob Henriquez, Abram Henriquez, brother of Jacob Henriquez and brother of Isaac da Siqueira. That's 15 persons in 5436. 5437, there were 90 offerings and at least 17 persons. And I'll put these up here and we can just look at them for a bit. Again, in Nissan, someone had recognized the tough ones. That's to us. More specific names: Benjamin Vega's rival, Benjamin Vega's nephew, Simos and Limos, David de Andrade, Geddes. There was a lot of excitement about Geddes' arrival. I can remember many records for that one name. And Jacob Rodriguez de Leo, Peso, Salvador, and so on. Departures. 5436, there are 23 records, only 3 persons. In 5437, 10 records with 8 different persons. And the record doesn't say where they were going, but we know that there was communication between London and Amsterdam. And we know Jesurun Alvares, or Gabay, 5436 is before he was Gabay. He was going, presumably could have been going to buy his diamonds in Amsterdam. It doesn't tell us that, but it could be. Same with Dazivedo, had connections in Amsterdam and so on. This is a special case. Promesa pilos que se hivan. And this occurred in Hesvan 10, 5436 and 5437. So on Hesvan 10, which has no particular significance religiously, on 2 years they had collections for unique wording. The interpretation of that wording that we've come up with, talking with experts, is that promesas for those who would remove themselves. So this was a general term on Hesvan 10. If you said you would be willing to go take yourself and go somewhere else to live, you would be, they were raising funds to help those kinds of people. Again, no names, no places, no amounts of money. But we believe this was money to promesas given to support those who would remove themselves from the community and not be a burden on the community. Why Hesvan 10? We really don't know. Promesas for forasteros, and this excludes any entries on the private chart. And you'll see Hesvan 10 here as well, but with the words forasteros. And 5436, those 6 entries, 5437, 23 entries. And it still suggests an increasing number of forasteros, or finally recognizing that they were there. It looked like there may have been 10 arrivals on or about to 322, by the way one of the offerings was worded. And as I said earlier, no names and no payment amounts recorded to the individuals, so we don't know who they were in this case. I will tell you that in subsequent years we will learn who they were in those years, but not this year. So come to the end. Discovery has begun. You've seen what we've learned about the leadership, the membership, and the accounts. We looked at the calendar and events and life cycle events and arrivals, departures, and forasteros. The good news is that all being well, the accounts will be online early this year and begin the discovery by everybody else who could like to dig in and do as I've done, drill into this very interesting project.
Thank you very much. That's absolutely outstanding work. It's going to change, I think, everything we know, and full credit to you for taking leadership in that, and obviously also thanks to Ali, to Tom, and to Bob. Ali's waving his hand, but that's really not true. He's done a lot. I see Frances has her hand up. Is that do you want to unmute yourself? Yeah.
I'm fascinated by this. I think it was the most wonderful account. What fascinates me as well is how people, Jews who are living here, related to the English Revolution, because there was the most enormous upheaval going on here at that point in time. It was massive, and it totally changed the way the country was governed in the end. And so I'm just wondering if there are parallels and interactions with the historical sequences that are going on in any of these records. Were people scared? Were they part of it? What? Sorry.
I do have, and I got to admit that I couldn't tell anything of what you were describing. I got the context from reading the literature, and there's some really good sources of people who went into the community records, not the synagogue records, other records,
Yes.
notarial records, and they found a lot of information. But I really couldn't sense from reading the accounts any of the context of what was going on in England at the time.
It was massive. It was a huge
Correct.
transfer of power, which didn't stop. It was full of violence and complexity. I'd be very interested to know how they were fitting into, or where they were escaping that. Yeah, I'd love to know. Does anybody know? Sorry.
Well, the revolution that you are probably pointing to is the one by Cromwell.
Yes.
Right.
And
right.
But that
Yes.
ended in 1660.
That's right.
So the period we are talking about here, which is 15 years later,
That's right.
was under Charles II.
Yes.
And the glorious revolution has yet to come.
Yes, that's right. It was a transitional period.
Yeah. So I don't know. Was there a lot of upheaval in those times? And
I would have thought there must have been a lot of complicated change. You sort of look at some of the theatre and the stuff. It's complicated. I don't know which side people claim to be on or how they did it. I'll try and look it up, if you like. I'll take a peek at it.
And as far as I know, they chose the side of the royals.
Yes. Yes.
Great for them. And in coming years, we will also see that they gave gifts to the Lord Mayor of London. So their allegiance was to the powers that be.
Yes.
Mostly, which for their own safety might have been best.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, it might.
I don't know if later annual accounts provide us with side glimpses of, for example, the Glorious Revolution.
Yes. I'll have a look and see if I can.
We'll come to that.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Ali, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I was just going to echo what Tom was saying, and he took the words out of my mouth, really. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously in Cromwell's time, they were trying to be friendly with Cromwell, but when Charles came the Restoration, they switch sides very, very seamlessly. And that seems to have been the pattern throughout. I don't think we can tell from the accounts what's happening in that respect, but a lot of these very wealthy merchants were also financing
Cromwell
campaigns, starting with Cromwell, and
Yes.
later on other royal kings and so forth, all the way to like 1745 when they financed the Hanoverian quelling of the Jacobite uprising. So the pesky Scots. So there is in one of the Ascamot, and I'm not sure how early this goes. I'd need to check the earliest one, but in one of the later Ascamots, there's a specific prohibition on members supporting any political party or faction or anything like that, and it's very much couched in terms of for the security and safety of the nation. So I think they were always very aware of this, and perhaps any kind of interaction would have been, in the background through loans and things like that, which are perfectly reasonable things. That's what bankers do. So that's my guess, but I think we won't find that in the accounts.
Can I just jump in? I think Cromwell actually welcomed the Jews. There was a point at which he stated the welcome of the Jews, and that was a return. But I haven't got the details of that, but it was quite specific that Oliver Cromwell did that.
Yes, and the Glorious Revolution was financed not from London, but from the Dutch side, notably the Baron Lopez, who reportedly loaned 2 million guilders to William the second or the third. I don't know which he was in England. And as rumor goes, he didn't want to receive for that because he valued the word of William III, stadtholder of Holland, so much that he didn't need to receive it. But I don't know if the London Jews provided any assistance to that loan, because even the Baron did not have so much money. So he had to gather that money from various sources all over Europe, and maybe also from England.
I remember once Diane Toledano, who was of course later Haham in Amsterdam, apropos the nothing much, suddenly launched into a talk about how King James II was actually quite friendly towards the Jews, and we should never forget that. So I guess we were backing both horses in that particular race. I just have a question apropos to what Ali was saying about political neutrality. I'm wondering if that might be why the fundraising for Terra Santa took place in people's homes rather than in the congregation, because that was both promoting a Jewish cause, and also Terra Santa belonged to the Ottomans. I don't know if that's stretching it a bit, but it's just one particular thought. Before we go to Bernard, we have I have received a message from Luca Ascoli, who is watching on YouTube. Luca is the expert on Italy and a lot of other things as well, and he's just commenting on the word berim, and he's just wondering whether it could mean friend. And where it came from. He points out that in Hebrew you would write the Hebrew letters Beit, Rosh, Yud, Mem, which is exactly the same last letters for Havarim, friends, less the hate. So yeah, I think that makes sense. That so Berim and Havarim is from the same root. But I am no expert. David, do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
I think that's on the right track, because that was what the Lasky had suggested. That's what I derived from what Lasky suggested. Abram.
Great, thank you. Bernard, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, first of all, David and the rest of the team, thank you so much for this. Just listening to the first questions, it's clear that this is going to open a series of debates which are going to run over several decades, and it's absolutely invaluable. I just, looking at the actual records, one thing struck me. You mentioned some are written in Spanish, some are written in Portuguese, and some of them are clearly written in a mixture, where you've got words in one and words in the other in the same sentence, which is interesting historically and linguistically. And I think that will lead to some discussion. Sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat. There were two names that came up, or two words that came up, which led me to wonder whether or not there was confusion about nouns and names. One of them was, you talked about the arrival of the Bravos, and you talked about them as the brave, but there were also the Bravo family members, and I have so many times seen Bravo relatives of mine translated as brave. And the same with De Francia, where I think you used it as a name, but it could have had come from France, which quite a few of the arrivals did. And it was to do with one of the Vindas. I think it said Vinda de Francia. And the other surname, and I'm only throwing these in, not as a linguistic correction, but because people may want to look for the family records for people with these names. Another one that you mentioned is Pessoa, which in Portuguese obviously means person. But sometimes names meaning person eventually got transcribed into Pearson and so on. And I throw that one in because one of my 14th great-grandfathers had the surname Homem in Portuguese, which means man. But if it just said Homem, written H-O-M-E-M in the records, it might be interpreted as a man rather than somebody from the Homem family. You know, I had other relatives at the same time in other places with names that are very definitely recognizable as surnames and not as nouns. So it would be interesting, and I would be happy to collaborate on this, to go through and pick up on things that could have double or triple meanings, could be misconstrued as surnames or as proper nouns, and see whether or not we can make more sense. But this is an absolutely phenomenal contribution. And not only do I want to thank you, but I want to thank the people who've developed Transcribus, which is being used in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of countries, and is going to revolutionize research. And the more we can use it, the more we can assist people in using it, not just on the Sephardic projects, the greater we will be, or the greater will be our contribution to future understanding of past history.
Thank you. And as you say, it's just opening up kind of doors all over the place.
I just want to say very quickly, very good point you just made about Bernard about was it the name Bravo, was it a brave, and in Francia. I think I need to go back. In case of Francia, I think there was a member with that name, so I think that was a fair, maybe a good interpretation of Bravo. I don't know. It may be totally off. I may have made a very wild guess there and missed altogether. Thanks for bringing it up. Good.
So, David, thank you. David. This is David Silvera and team, Ali, Ton, David M, Bob. This is really amazing work. There's been a lot of hubbub in Silicon Valley over the last couple of months about a chat GPT, OpenAI, which has all kinds of, questions and concerns, and the fear of AI taking over human creativity and all of it. But I do wonder, and maybe Jeanette wants to weigh in on this too, how once you do this alchemy on the old records, whether there could be a training set built such that lay people could ask a chat GPT like activity to reconstruct the stories of families. I know I'm thinking ahead here and being optimistic, but I wonder if that day is coming sooner than later, and how to prepare the data set for that AI, that level of AI, especially as we both share a love of space. David S.
David, you can't. David, you're muted.
I'm going to decline to comment on that. I'm not up on AI to the extent that I would care to comment on this. I think in terms of machine learning, and that's about where I stop. And because I think past that, we're still teaching a machine how we think, and I'm not ready to accept AI as a not yet.
Ali?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that particular technology. I've read about it, but I can't pretend to be any kind of authority on it. But
I guess the reason I mention it, Ali, is we have proposed at the law school at Stanford that the day is coming when a computer can pass the bar exam or piece of the bar exam. And actually in two researchers at Columbia and two at Stanford independently used ChatGPT to earn a passing grade, so-called, in the multi-state 200 question
incredible
exam. So
it's
out
sure
there, but it's
starting
here.
to come. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think that the way forward for that has to be through a normalization process of the data. I mean, the stuff we're seeing here that David has produced, there are like 6 different spellings of names, 6 different spellings of events like circumcisions. It's not something. Of course, you can train an AI bot to sort of understand that and kind of normalize it as well, but it's much more difficult. And I think maybe as a kind of intermediate step, the next stage would be to standardize those. So, where we have Abrao, it's Abraham, where it's Moshe, it's Moses, the surnames Azevedo with an S, with a Z, you just sort of standardize everything. And then you start linking them, sort of nominal linkages. And that, I think I can see that can be very, very interesting in the future through the technology you're describing.
Jeanette?
You're muted. You're muted.
I just wanted to make a comment about that, which is probably very obvious, and that even when the names are perhaps standardized, we still need to be really careful and review the material, the original material, to make sure that we have not confused a noun with a name. My favorite example is a very, very long passage in a typed record, so fairly modern, from Russian, that I was too lazy to sit there and go through, so I stuck it through Google Translate. And the name Blanche was in there very prominently. So it kept being translated as white, but the word white was also in this text. And so I wound up having to go through it anyway to determine which was the woman's name and which was the color. And I think that we're going to, unless we can deal with context, we're going to wind up falling over our own feet by dealing with, by somehow not being able to distinguish in these translations, which is a name, which is a noun. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Can I say yes, but? And the yes, but is that with this technology now, we are opening up the possibility of research from perhaps a few dozen individuals to thousands of interested people. So if we can only sort of marshal them and sort of gamify what we're doing, we have a very interesting situation. Can I ask a question, which actually I have asked before privately, but I think it's perhaps interesting to ask publicly, about applying the technology that has been sort of built around the accounts to other data sets. For example, later data sets from the S&P or to Inquisition archives or to the Dutch archives and so forth. I don't know, David, if that's something you could answer, or maybe Ali.
I defer to David first, but I can say something.
He's saying safely muted.
Am I muted? No.
No.
Sorry, that's me.
David.
Yeah, I'm muted. I believe that there are folks working on that right now, as far as like working on the training for the archives in Torre de Tombo. Yes. So and there's no reason why it shouldn't be able to do that. And in fact, some of those that I looked at, the writing was very disciplined compared to what I've been working with here in the S&P. One got the impression that the priests who were part of the Inquisitions were better educated and more disciplined in that respect. You know, it certainly can be done. Obviously, again, they're going to still run into the same question, that someone needs to look at the context and make sure that names and words are correct. But it also needs people who understand how things were in those times. I'm not a historian, so I'm an engineer, so I look at the words as if they were software, you know. And so I don't have the context of a history to decide how the Portuguese was spelled or used at the time.
And I just want to mention that we have to be careful when we use the word AI. AI takes many forms. One of the bases of Transcribus's algorithms is context. That's one of its leaps forward. It's not just looking at word forms. It's not like OCR. It's totally different. So context is built in to this particular application. AI is a much more general term.
I will say, Bob, I understand that too. What we're missing here is the point I made it. I think we've trained the software, so it couldn't do what it's doing now if we hadn't taught it. So it becomes a question of machine learning what we know. Taking the step further for the machine to think by itself, I'm a little slow to adopt that just yet. Now, if you take I can understand the example that was given about passing a law exam. Yes, there's a lot of documents that can be searched and very quickly, and you can put logical statements together based on that. Yes, I could very well see how that is done. But is that really AI, or is that just a human that's taught the computer how to do this? Is that machine learning in effect?
And David and Ali have been training Transcribus to read the archives of London community. But I think this model, which is trained to read Portuguese and Hebrew, and sometimes a bit of English and Spanish as well, will be applicable to other Portuguese Jewish communities in the Western diaspora, because they are also written in Portuguese, Spanish, Hebrew. So what we are doing here may well be significant for other communities to follow as an example.
Can I just add something to that? Because the way Transcribus works, and David will be able to back me up on this, is that it recognizes words through shapes. It doesn't actually recognize what the word means. And it's very dependent on that particular handwriting. So in effect, that particular scribe. And the more you train it on a particular handwriting, the more accurate it becomes. You get less errors. But if you use the same model for a completely different scribe, as we found, it suddenly starts becoming a lot less accurate. You can make it more accurate by editing it and correcting it, and then retraining it so that it also recognizes that scribe. So it's a kind of cumulative process where it builds on top of each other. And the trick, of course, is to get as many different handwritings as possible, as many different types of script as possible together, so that when it comes across something that's a little bit unfamiliar, it can approximate to those. Now, our model at the moment is a relatively small model. It's very accurate for what we've done, for the 3 years that we've done. But in years going forward, I think it's going to become increasingly more difficult. And we'll have to do that process, as I say, of retraining it and adding to it. There are other projects going on which involve Portuguese that I'm aware of. There's a major project being coordinated by Nova University in Lisbon, with funding from the European Union on the Tombo Inquisition records. And they've got a big team working on that. And hopefully, within the next 6 months, we should start to see results from that. And that model, if they publish it, and they said they would, will be very useful, I think. But again, that's going to be useful for those, the handwritings that they've seen. But they're looking at a very wide chronology there. They're looking at over 150, 200 years. So that could be quite useful. And we can try it, these are the sort of things. This is where collaboration maybe comes in. We could sort of try it on ours. We could try ours on theirs. There's another one, I don't know who developed that, but the Transcribus team seemed to be curating it of Portuguese, early modern Portuguese, which is quite big. It's about 5 or 6 times bigger than our sort of model. And again, the results when you use it on Bevis Marks records are not great. They're not fantastic. So they would need to be retrained and edited. But it's a step in the right direction.
Ali, am I right in remembering that you said that when multiple sort of different German models were sort of consolidated, I'm not quite sure how, just sort of poured together and sort of mixed up or something, that provided a general model for reading German documents?
Yes, very much so. If Transcribus sees something that it's been trained on, it'll recognize it to a large degree, but it has to have been trained on it.
So perhaps these 3 projects on Portuguese will be insufficient. We can hope for the best.
Yeah, I mean, it's an evolutionary process.
Yeah. Thank you. Do we have any further comments on YouTube? Ton, where are you?
Yes, Noah Ramos remarks about the Francia family, that there were 2 business brothers, and they even appear as that name in Spanish records of that time. So Francia is a last name. And I know that they were among the earliest to settle in London because they were already there when Cornwall admitted the Jews to England. And there was a remark from Arnold de Vries, but I don't know, he remarked on one of the slides. He said note 5 is Simchat Torah. But I don't know, I don't remember which slide that was. It was in the beginning. Are there any questions on YouTube?
No, there's some notes of congratulations to David, but that's all we have there.
Okay, and many thank yous on in the chat also. So I think we can wrap it up, David.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you to our patrons who make all of this possible. Thank you to our viewers on YouTube. We hope to see you next week, and David will tell you who our guest will be the coming week. But most of all, thank you to David Silveira for a very interesting and compelling presentation. One of the best we've had in our few years of existence so far. So for me, see you around, and David.
Yeah, I would just echo that, David. Thank you very much. I think it's perhaps the single most important presentation we've had, and it just opens up so many doors. Next week we welcome Jeff Molker, who is the original Sephardic genealogist and sort of the grandfather of everything we're doing today, and we're very honoured to welcome him. I'd like to, of course, just echo Ton and say thank you to everyone, especially thank you to our patrons, because without you we wouldn't still be here, and especially thanks to David. It's really the most outstanding work that we've had so far, and we look forward to seeing everyone again next week.